All right, guys, so today, after we've already covered decompression breathing and lengthening of the spine, we're going to try to apply that to some of your normal workouts in more of a therapeutic way. And this is good if you're struggling with some type of injury or you just feel imbalanced and you don't want to go heavy. These are some good alternatives to what you're already doing. So it's better to do this than to skip a day. So we'll start out with the barbell and just work on the RDL. So you've been approaching that barbell, think about what we talked about before, lengthening, expanding that chest, utilizing the pelvic floor, diaphragm, and our three favorite pairs of serratus muscles. Because everything's going to be harder if we continually maintain that length in the spine, and it's forcing the hips and the shoulders to move the central structure. So we're going to hinge down and kind of go relaxed there. So the RDL, it's good because as we breathe, it's going to anchor our shoulders down. So as we lengthen and we breathe, the shoulders are going to be pinned down, so that rest of that goes into that expansion of the chest. And then you can just slowly work your way down. Instead of sliding down or the spine might be helping out, we're trying to lower ourselves down slowly using just those hips. Subtle bend in the knees. Again, it's not about how low you go. It's about finding that tension earlier. Should be a little bit of a shake here. You can feel it in the knees. So we don't want to relax where we're bending at the spine or extending even at the neck. We're trying to maintain the three curves of the spine. Going up too. Once you've lost it, you kind of have to work back into it. Each breath, lengthening, building on that tension. One part we definitely miss is coming back up. Using that psoas muscle is actually the hardest part there. And you're gonna hit that wall right about here. And that psoas is really engaged and your body's just gonna wanna retract and throw the pelvis forward, but you're gonna hit that wall. And what the wall is that psoas is optimally engaged and we're stretching all those posterior muscles like the QL and the erectors that are so tight and hold us into this bad pattern. So that's what the wall is, and that'll come in time. Let's do one more of those. Another thing I'm focusing on here is maybe even turning the big toes in, get a little better anchor from the hips. And you can think about either pushing the knees out or squeezing the hips in. Eventually get good where you can do both, where you're pulling the hips in, the inner thigh muscles, and driving the knees out at the same time. And whatever is harder for you, if you want to go wider and that's harder with your legs, do that. For me, it's definitely narrow. If that's a confusing concept, you can just think about, okay, I'm going to drive my feet out. I'm trying to spread the floor away. Or like you're trying to pull the feet in, wrinkle the floor underneath you. And eventually you understand that those two opposing forces where the hips are turning in, the knees are driving out. All right, let's go up into the rack position here. Actually, let's do some high pulls. Those are really good from that position. So as we come up, we're using that psoas. We're going to do the thumb trace like we've done in the other breathing exercises. So breath into the tailbone, pelvic floor area. Come up into that lower serratus. Expand there and depress those lower ribs. Here, serratus anterior. Driving those elbows wide, expanding the rib cage. And then come up where we're driving those elbows really high. Getting the base of the neck, that serratus posterior superior. And then another breath. Trying to get all three of those. The goal there is to get those elbows high and drive the shoulders down. Again, you don't have to be that rigid with it, but working through those areas can definitely help you get better at being more fluid with that. Should be shaky. Getting that hamstring stretch, but also that back stretch in those erectors, QL. Driving up. Should be sweaty, should be shaky. If you're sweaty and shaky, you're doing work. Even though there's no weight on the bar, you can still make this type of stuff hard. So we're going down. Let's bring it up into the rack position here. So what we want to try to do is straighten the elbows out, or straighten the wrists out a little bit. Especially with lack of shoulder mobility, the wrist is going to do a lot of the work, and you can get sprained wrists like I have in the past just from repetition here. So this one we're going to do a bit of a hinge with the hips, and the elbows are going to rise up. We're trying to keep that motion mainly in that shoulder and the hip joints like before. So breath in. You can really feel that tension already in the shoulders. It's okay if the wrists extend a little bit. You're just doing your best. It's going to feel like you're trying to knock yourself on your butt. That's when you can really use those feet to grip the ground. Good. And that's almost like you're preparing to drive up overhead. We're just doing it in slow motion. And these are the little subtle things we tend to gloss over in our big macro movements. Breaking it down step by step, not skipping over those rigid tight areas, but actually driving into them can really help. And that way, you don't have to skip gym day, you can still come and work out. You don't even need the bar for this stuff, but it definitely helps, and it's good to have something to work with like this. If you want to go overhead with that, which my spine tends to extend too much, so really think about, even when you bring the bar up into that rack position, engaging that psoas muscle here. So why do you feel like you're not standing up straight? Because that psoas is engaged. As soon as you let it go, you end up being here, and then it's hard to lock it back in. So it's okay to drop down here again. Get that engagement where you're sucking your belly button into your spine. And you'll feel that tension. And then you can even do a bit of a reverse lunge, which I like because it just challenges the balance. Try to keep that psoas engaged, don't lose it, because then you're gonna have to go back down, regain composure. It's tough, it's harder on the balance. And I lost it there, so we gotta re-engage. Let's try that again. No weight, but it's still shaky. And when your spine is lengthened like that, you might notice that it's even hard to straighten your elbows out fully, and it should be that way. Same with the knees. It's gonna be impossible to lock them out if we got the right engagement in the spine. It's gonna feel like you're lifting a ton of weight. It's impossible to straighten them out. It's easy if we just kind of relax the spine, and that's what the spine is meant to do, is meant to flex and extend. But if we're always abusing that, we run into trouble, we run into degeneration down the road. So a life lesson, it's not about the destination, the journey, how we get there. We want strength, we want to hit our PRs, but at the same time, we want to work on spinal strength, decompression, to help us with when we do approach big weight, that we won't hurt ourselves. Because yeah, we do want to challenge ourselves there. It's not about getting deeper into an exercise all the time, but finding that tension earlier. Some good stuff with the barbell there. Let's try to transfer this to the kettlebell. So one good breathing exercise I give to a lot of people is called the platter exercise. It's hard even without the kettlebell. You're lengthening, getting that tension there in that psoas muscle. And then that more engagement you have there, you're gonna feel it throughout the whole posterior chain in the back of the spine. And then we're kind of scooping up, finding that stretch in your pecs where your shoulders are pushing out, but you're not bending at the spine to get that. So then you'll notice you lose this. It's that connection between the hips and the shoulders, and then the hands are gonna move away from the hips. So you're finding tension, hamstrings in the back, and then breathing into that. Now adding a kettlebell to this, it's gonna be very tough, but again, it's nice to have something there. You just don't wanna find yourself rounding to do it. So the farther you get that kettlebell out there, the tougher it's going to be. Eccentric contraction for you. It's not really meant for two hands, but you can kind of just cross over like that. Same thing, elbows gliding in at the sides. Find that psoas engagement. And you're gonna fatigue probably a lot earlier than you would if you're just doing your hands. Trying to pull my elbows in towards each other and widening the palms. Try to get 5, maybe 6 breaths where the shoulders are moving away from the hips. And then pulling yourself back up on that exhale. Don't just collapse into it. Try to keep all that tension you've built and then drive through it again. It's a really great one. Let's do it one more time. Engaging, pulling belly button to the spine, chest is wide. Squeezing those elbows into your sides. Again, you can think about pushing the floor away or trying to wrinkle it underneath you, or unless you've really gotten good with pulling the hips in, pushing the knees out, it's just a tough concept. But all these little things work together to make these exercises harder. So the better you get at it, the harder they get, but the more you're getting done in a short amount of time. Maybe let's flip the hands here. Got to have symmetry, right? Pulling those elbows in. You're gonna feel this neck, hamstrings, feet, arches. Name a part of your body. And then slowly pulling it in. Pulling up. That's a concept we miss a lot. A lot of times, even with the deadlift, we're kind of lifting with the back instead of lifting with those psoas muscles. That engagement there. The more weight you have on, the more you're going to have to recruit your back muscles. Even if you have what looks like good form, you can still feel a lot of back. Deadlift, great exercise, but it can lead to some problems. So, kettlebell, can do an overhead press. Doing a lot of this since my left shoulder has been a little bit wonky. Instead of just doing like the full kind of long cycle with the kettlebell, we're just gonna swing it up into the rack position. I like to have one to counterbalance. Helps you to squeeze that fist. Make sure your elbow and wrist are in the straight line. And you're just gonna push the floor away, get those hips squared underneath you. Anytime you got some weight, that's what's good. So your body doesn't wanna be here. It wants to square those hips underneath you to drive upwards to help you lift. And we're just gonna again, it's gonna feel like you can't straighten that elbow out. But that's great. I love having something where you're just pushing and pushing and it's not happening, but you know so much is changing in your body. Let's switch that up. Bring this other guy into the rack position. This one out to the side, just kind of just counterbalancing and squeezing. Helps pull the shoulder down. And then you're not really using the assist, you're just trying to. My left shoulder was already doing a lot better. Before that was really achy, but just doing a week of those has made a big difference. Think about the breath all the way down to the tailbone. Inhale, lengthen. Exhale, drive up. Find that tension. Relatively a really light kettlebell for me, but with that lightweight, just changing the form, making it hard, making it therapeutic. So corrective movement is a great therapy. Instead of using heavy weight where our spine, want to compress more. Even in this stage, even though it might look like I have better shoulder mobility here, and I can extend more, I've put my spine in a really weird position. There's lots of extension there that I just can't fight against. even without weight, you add weight, it's gonna look even worse. With doing the kettlebell swing, especially for me, I tend to get a little too anterior pelvic tilt and the spine tends to extend. So we want to keep that engagement there, especially as we're bringing that bell up, the spine's gonna wanna help out a little bit. So if we keep that more stiff in the spine, it's gonna help us with that hip motion. So it's gonna feel a little more rigid and unnatural than what you've done before. But again, it's gonna help protect the spine, the joints. Really lightweight. Actually, setting yourselves up here, we're hinging down, kind of reaching is really good, so you're getting that engagement. And then let it follow through. You're kind of just never letting go of that hip flexor engagement. Again, this is really not going to work with like the American style going up. You're going to really feel like you're knocking yourself out or knocking yourself back. But definitely trying to strive to get a little higher. Because if I go overhead, then I've lost it. I've extended too much. So if it's American Swing Day, just let the coach know. Working through that motion where you're strong hip hinge, spine really stiff, a little higher each time. Not letting the hips come through too much. It's really gonna exhaust you pretty quickly, but good alternative if you've got some back pain, side joint pain. Good way to work through that. If it hurts, go back to just doing the platter with the kettlebell. It's still a similar motion, you're still getting that whole body hinging, extension, motion. Just keeping it more controlled in the hips. Let's go over back squat quickly here. Return to the bar again. So, if I got no weight or light weight, I'll try to even get a little bit lower on my shoulders because I have a lot of thoracic curvature, so it's going to help me limit that rounding there. And normally it's good if I got a lot of weight, I'm gonna, drive down, push those knees out. But if the back's angry, we can do more of a hip hinge. So we're not going very deep, we're just inhaling, lengthening, hinging back, finding that hip right there. And then, very good, it's all in the hip hinge. So it's less knee, less spine. Spine's really strict, not moving at all. Think about the same things, pushing the knees out, pulling the hips in at the same time. More of a hip hinge. That way you're not gonna hurt that small of the low back, those lumbar discs. Let's see if you can see the difference here. Where that butt just kind of winks down below. And it's good to get that depth every once in a while. But again, it can bother the low back. Same with the front rack position. You know, if you're here, think about that same thing. You can do more of a hip hinge where you're finding that hamstring tension, low back tension. Again, there's something about slowing the negative. A lot of us kind of, boom, just rebound off the joints. It's really bad for the pelvic floor. So when we're maybe even initially letting the weight go, but we're catching that, using our hip flexors to slow down and then drive back up. Good change, especially if you're warming up. Just do a few like that. And then as you're adding the heavy weight, you can return to what you're normally doing. It's just gonna be a good contrast. You're already doing that light weight anyways, might as well make it hard. And then work on depth and weight and getting stronger, hitting your next PR. It's good balance. We'll just finish with some pull-up stuff ideas here. Definitely sweating. This stuff is hard, right? I've just done a few minutes of this, but we're using inhibited muscles, weak muscles that we're not used to using, so it's gonna wear us out. And a lot of kettlebell drills I've been doing lately, I'll start with that isolated movement. As I get exhausted like this, that's when I go into that long cycle where I'm just kind of using my spine more, that style of stuff. Because then you can go longer, you'll have better endurance because the spine is helping you out. But as soon as we take the spine out of the equation, force the hips and shoulders to work, it's a much tougher time. All right, so pull up, go a little wider, and we're just trying to maybe even get it from the back here. So you can kind of see the difference between this, just hanging on the joints, versus this subtle engagement where the hip hinge pulls in. You can probably feel that, see that stress in the back there. So we're just pulling the shoulders in, lengthening the neck, engagement there. Even just hanging there is tough. And then if you need to, if you can't really, drive up from that position, which it just makes one pull-up so much harder, you can use a pull-up assist band. I'd rather you have a pull-up assist band out here to get you up there. Same thing with doing your kipping. You don't want too much bend in the spine. So I'd rather see the pull-up assist band probably there, but you can definitely get good at using your hips, keeping that spine really stiff. I'll try, I'm not the best at that one. Again, you gotta find a lockout position. So then you're kind of pendulum motion. Spine not moving too much. Just keeping it stiff rather than, like letting everything go. Your spine just getting tossed about. And that's not bad either, because sometimes I feel like that's great. It's like, oh yeah, loosens up the spine. But especially if you got an injury or a joint sprain, the last thing you want is that much motion in the spine. So being really stiff with it, same thing, now you're working with gravity, but you're also actively driving out best of both worlds. Really gonna help. Let's finish it off with just your standard push-up. A lot of this stuff, it's the same stuff over and again, beating the dead horse. But the more stuff you see, I think it's gonna help drive these points home. We're always told, let's make these push-ups harder. A couple ways to do that is here, you're pushing off, you're kind of pulling those hip flexors in, engaging just that subtle bit of length. Where you're putting your body past your shoulders a little bit, and then driving down when the elbows are squeezing in. Maintaining that length. Or normally I just kind of want to be here, where the shoulders really turn in and the rounding of the spine happens. So we're avoiding that. Necklace was a bad choice. And then even the 8-point plank is a good alternative to your standard plank. Knees in, toes tucked. Elbows a little bit higher than eye level. It looks like it's going to be easier than your normal plank, but it's not. Driving the hips up. Or even just like a bag on your back, something to push up against. Maintain that content so you're not resting there on the joints. You're constantly driving up and lengthening. Trying to get those breaths all the way down to the tailbone. All right, guys, that's it.